Hey, shalom, shalom, shalom lakam, which is peace unto you all. Ayawam tawab la atam za'ach yakam yawam on Rachagado, Charlotte, which is good day. This is your brother Yawam from the GMS camp in Charlotte. Nachamatam kaya. Hamalakathashamayim kwara, repent ye for. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Call like mla la abna wa Yahweh bahasham Yahweh shai bahasham Rachakodash. Wamashna la zakwanim na Wamalakim Sharachagado, which is all praises to our Father Yahweh, which means he exists bahasham. In the name Yahweh Shai delivers and double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone. Thahalyam, this is Psalm chapter 1 and verse 1. In the subtitle it reads, it says, the righteous and the wicked contrasted. Verse 1, it says, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. All right, and ultimately this is talking about, the elect man. All right, the one that, essentially, took the way, mentioned in Jeremiah, the 6th chapter and the 16th verse. Let me get this real fast. This is Jeremiah chapter 6. Jeremiah chapter 6 and verse 16. And it says, thus saith the Lord, stand ye in the ways and see and ask for the old paths, where is the good way, and walk therein, and ye shall find rest for your souls. But they said, we will not walk therein. And that's essentially talking about 2/3. All right, in the latter part of this, in this verse right here. But the elect man is going to take, these ways right here, the good path, or excuse me, the old paths, all right, in that good way. All right, that's why I said, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, because the ungodly is essentially going to be destroyed. All right, so let's get a couple more precepts. Let's get Micah chapter 2. All right, we'll get verse 10. And it says, arise, ye, and depart, because when it said, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, all right, essentially that represents somebody that's not taking, the route of 2/3. All right, they're taking the route, essentially, of that road less traveled by. All right, and that road less traveled by would be arising and departing. All right, so it says, arise, ye, and depart, for this is not your rest. All right, ultimately, the ways, this lifestyle of the heathen, all right, the ungodly, these ungodly hegemonies that Esau Edom has essentially constructed, all right, the social contracts and the ways of the heathen, all right, ultimately this is not meant to be our rest. So it says, arise ye and depart, for this is not your rest, because it is polluted. It shall destroy you even with the sword destruction, all right, the ones that, essentially took the way of the scornful, all right. Going back to Psalms 1 and verse 1, it says, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor sitteth in the seat of the, nor standeth in ways of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful, because these individuals essentially will be destroyed, all right, for walking in those ways because they didn't want to arise and depart, all right. So I'm going to run this back. Psalms 1 and verse 1, it says, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. All right. And ultimately, this represents this right here, Proverbs 1 and verse 32, because those that are essentially in those ways, they found different benefits in those ways that they was into, so because they wanted to choose that, all right, they're going to be rewarded for it. This is Proverbs 1 and verse 32. It says, for the turning away of the simple shall slay them, and the prosperity of fools shall destroy them, so 2/3, they took those ways, all right, they took that way because they found it prosperous. All right, and let's get this word for prosperity. And it says Shaw YH 7962. It says quietness, ease, prosperity. All right, now it says security, genuine or false. So even if it was a false sense of security, all right, 2/3 is taking that. All right. And because, they took that, they took that faulty way, they will be rewarded for that. All right, that's why it says, and the prosperity of fools shall destroy them. All right. So going back to Psalm chapter 1 and verse 1, it says, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. All right. Blessed is going to be that man, because essentially he's putting on his strength. All right, talking about these scriptures, this is Isaiah 52 and 1. It says, awake, awake, put on thy strength, because going back, to Psalms 1 and 1, it says, that blessed is going to be that man, that doesn't sit amongst the ungodly, all right, doesn't, stand in the way of sinners, all right, and it isn't in the seat of the scornful, roughly paraphrasing, all right, he's going to be blessed, because individuals like that, they chose those specific routes, all right, and which for choosing those, they understood that those ways didn't have any type of benefits. It's just that 2/3, essentially, they subscribe to are the ways that Esau Edom has given them, because it benefits them in whatever way, and those benefits are not really benefits. It's just, the complacency that Jake has put themselves in, But nevertheless, continuing on, Isaiah 52:1, it says, "Awake, awake, put on thy strength, O Zion, put on thy beautiful garments, O Jerusalem, the holy city." It says, "For henceforth they shall no more come into thee, the uncircumcised and the unclean." It says, "Shake thyself from the dust, arise and sit down, O Jerusalem, loose thyself from the bands of thy neck, O captive daughter of Zion." And ultimately, going back into verse 1, or going back to Psalms 1:1, all right, the the righteous is going to be blessed. All right, the righteous man is going to be blessed, because he's not walking in these ways, So a wise man, scriptures say, "A prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and is punished," because we read Isaiah 52:1 and 2. All right, essentially arising and departing. All right, awaking and putting on the strength. Well, rising and departing goes back to Micah 2:10, but waking and putting on the strength. All right, essentially a wise man will be doing that. That's why I quoted, Proverbs 22:3. A prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and is punished. All right, so the scriptures highlight time and time again, to walk, all right, in the ways of old, and essentially shuns, all right, the ways that's not beneficial for us, you see, but 2/3 is going to take those ways because they see benefits and the ways that, uh, they see benefits in the ways that, Esau Edom has given them, all right, and because of that, by default, it's going to amount to destruction. All right, so let's get some of those ways that's, that it's talking about, all right, because these represent, the ways of sinners and sitting in the seat of the scornful. This is Galatians chapter 5, and we'll start at verse 16, and it says, "This I say then, walk in the spirit," because we don't want to walk in a way of 2/3. So it says, "And ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh." All right, because being that, 2/3, they took them ways. These ways are essentially, they serve as they serve their lustful desires. All right, essentially going into, the seat of the scornful. All right, the ungodly ways. All right, it's no temperance in ungodly ways, so they're essentially abiding in the flesh. So it says, "For the flesh lusteth against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary the one to the other, so that ye cannot do the things that ye would." So ultimately, that's why it goes into a test, all right, in which the elect is going to abide, all right, in the spirit, because those that are essentially living after the flesh, and they're just going to be taken over by the flesh, they're going to be taken over by those temptations, you see, which the scriptures say, "When thou come to serve the Lord, prepare thy soul for temptation," so it's a test, all right, because we have to be purged, of that old man, so which essentially the elect is going to awake and put on that strength, all right, which represents, walking in the spirit, all right. So continuing on, it says, "For the flesh lusteth against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary the one to the other, so that ye cannot do the things that ye would," because again, it goes into a test. Verse 18, it says, "But if ye be led of the spirit, ye are not under the law. Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery," all right, because this goes into the ways of the sinners. All right, mentioned in Psalms 1:1, it says, "Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revilings, and such like, of the which I tell you before, as I have also told you in time past, they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of the Most High." All right, so that's the road that we don't want to take. That's the way that we don't want to take. All right, that's the way of the world. Verse 22, it says, "For the fruit of the spirit is love." All right, love is, essentially the keeping of the law, treating your neighbor as you would yourself, So it says joy, peace, long suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. All right, it says, and they that are Hamashayach, that belong to Hamashayach, have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts. If we live in the spirit, let us also walk in the spirit. All right, so walking in the spirit, again, we can't keep the whole law, you see, but we're ultimately justified, all right, by our faith, which puts forth those works, because we're not going to get it perfect, but that's ultimately why we believe in the Lord, Yahweh Shai HaMashiach. All right, so going back, let's get Psalms chapter 1. We'll get verse 2. It says, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doeth he meditate day and night. All right, so ultimately, continually being upon thinking about these scriptures, that ultimately shows true stability. All right, let's get Isaiah 33 and verse, we'll get verse, Isaiah 33 and we'll get verse 6. And it says, and wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times, and strength of salvation. The fear of the Lord is his treasure, so the fear of the Lord, ultimately, that's what's going to lead us forth, to receiving of the kingdom, you see, because the faith is the driving engine. All right, the faith is the driving engine for that fear, you see, which that fear ultimately it corresponds with that stability, because going back to Psalms 1 and verse 2, it says, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doeth he meditate day and night, so that's continually being upon the elect's mind. All right, and by doing so, that's going to keep, that's going to get keep us established. All right, that's why it says right here in Bon Sirach chapter 6, we get Bon Sirach 6, and let me see, Bon Sirach 6 and verse 37, and it says, let thy mind be upon the ordinances of the Lord, and meditate continually in his commandments. He shall establish thine heart, and give thee wisdom at thine own desire. So by essentially continually having the word on our mind, the Lord is gonna keep us established. All right, and that's that stability that we got in Isaiah 33 and 6. It said, wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times. All right. So going back, Psalms 1 and verse 2, it says, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doeth he meditate day and night, because ultimately that's going to keep us rooted, all right, in this understanding. All right, and again, the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding is going to be our stability, because as all these things are going on, 2/3 in a type of a state to where they're very turbulent. All right, they rocking with the waves. All right, and if they rocking with the waves, eventually they can go under. All right, whereas us, we stable, we not tottering. All right, we're ultimately able to be as that house mentioned in Matthew the 7th chapter in the 24th verse. We have a stability because we're abiding in Yahweh Shai HaMashiach, who is that rock. That's our stability. All right, and he's also the express image of, essentially the scriptures. All right, Psalms 1 and 2. All right, so continuing on, it says, and he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. All right, and a tree that that's beside so a river. All right, that shows that it's connected to a source. All right, and that tree is gonna be healthy. So let's get this real fast. This is John chapter 7 and verse 38, and it says, he that believeth on me, as the scripture hath said, excuse me, I'm gonna read it again. He that believeth on me, as the scripture hath said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. All right, so ultimately, the elect man is going to be constantly bringing out his word, you see, and in doing so, all right, that shows that a state of Psalms 1 and verse 3, all right, where that tree is planted by the rivers of water, because that tree is connected to the source, all right. Essentially, the elect is connected to the source, who is Yahweh Shai HaMashiach, and by default, all right, that's ultimately a healthy tree, all right, and which in the scriptures, all right, trees are likened unto men. All right, so Psalms 1 and 3, it says, and he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. Let's also get this, because that tree is ultimately in a healthy estate. All right, this is Psalm chapter 92, and where we're really going to be healthy is going to be in the kingdom, because we're going to have We're gonna have sustenance. All right, we're gonna be provided for. All right, this is Psalms 92.